Well, Eric, I see you took at least part of my last video addressing you to heart, and did something that distinguishes you from your father. Between you, Ray Comfort, and Mike Fucker Flea, I'm not sure which is worse. The sad part is, even the morally and intellectually bankrupt Kent Hovind would scream in tortured agony if he could see you now. Normally, I'd address Raymond or one of the many other apologists that have come out in defense of Joshua Duggar after it recently came to light that he'd molested several young ladies more than a dozen years ago, including 4 of his sisters. You parade Christian morals and a judge that because he's supposedly right before his magic sky fairy, that he shouldn't be held to account for his actions in the here and now. You are all very sick and demented people. Police reports ordered destroyed, a public figure that should never have been left to roam free, let alone be hidden away for months by his parents before making a confession to law enforcement. Even when his crimes were reported, there was no action by the state to seek redress against the young man for his crimes. Now I'll admit that he was a teenager of perhaps 14 or 15 when this went on, and yes, that was some time ago. The problem isn't that this is coming out now, but that it took until now to be made known. It should have been dealt with at the time, and by way of a carefully crafted sequence of events, it was not. You conspiracy theorists, take notes. This is how you build a conspiracy. You keep it small, silence the victims, and avoid trying to cover up showy things. As far as I can tell, this one was perhaps 10 people, not including the victims, all of which absolutely had to know what the story was to play their part in it. The trooper that Josh confessed to, Jim Bob and Michelle, Mike Fucker Flea, and the parents of the little girl he assaulted that was not an immediate family member, so they'd remain silent. Josh's wife was apparently in on the deal as well, and if that had been me, I would have gone to the police immediately. Because I'll be fucked if I put my life in jeopardy for a man that could cost me my children if something like that ever came to light. That's right, I said my life. Pregnancy comes at a significant cost in terms of energy and resources, and as I'm well aware, giving birth could end my life in the most permanent of ways. Forget the loss of my social life, childbirth puts women in the ground on a daily basis, even in the first world. No different than if someone on the street put a bullet in her. Sex isn't violence in and of itself, but the consequences of it have the same potential to kill. Modern medicine, which wouldn't be possible without a deep understanding of the science you decry to make your money, can improve the odds substantially, but we still lose hundreds of women every year. Contraceptives, abortion and the like all serve to save women year after year, and yet people like you and Jim Bob Duggar continue to tout Christian morals to put the women of the world at even larger risk. Then we have the situation with Joshua, which is not only wrong on its face, but puts your so-called morals to the test. Guess what, Eric? You failed. You failed so hard that even your own father would be ashamed of you. I know I'm loath to accept that you're even human, despite outward appearances. I read your little blog post, and you make several statements that are inhuman, at best. Let's just start with your title, shall we? Shocking news, Josh Duggar is a sinner. Why does this shock you in any way? Given the evangelical Christian viewpoint that we are all sinners, without exception, including the children I'm carrying, then I'm left to assume that you're trying to be sarcastic. Joshua isn't a sinner, he's a fucking felon, and should be treated as such. You blame the media for praising several crimes: lust, abortion, homosexual behavior, pornography and fornication. To finish up your set of bullet points, you add that it condemns confession, judgment and forgiveness. Strictly for the purposes of making Christianity look bad. Newsflash, genius. We don't need the mainstream media to make Christianity look bad. You're doing a lovely job of that without their help. You base your morality on a 3,500-year-old storybook that's soaked in more blood than the collective works of horror literature and film in its entirety. Just one of those stories, perversely that of another Joshua, has enough bloodshed to put Elizabeth Bathory to shame. We teach our children to respect the minds and bodies of others because it's central to the survival of our species, and your little buddy violated that. He fondled children. Your words in a few other places suggest that if it weren't for your fear of divine retribution, that you would do all of these things and more. Why is that, Eric? Are you so morally bankrupt that you have to have the threat of violence to keep you in line? That's the thinking of a barely controlled child. I have to hand it to your father, at least he wasn't so stupid as to advocate the return to work of someone with a history of child molestation. Do you know what he does for a living, Eric? What am I saying? Of course you do. He worked in Washington, D.C. as the executive director for the Family Research Council. A job that, by its nature, requires that he work with families, most of them Christian. You people wax lyrical about Catholic priests being shuffled around and avoiding the only justice they're going to get, and how utterly wrong it is, but when faced with one of your own that has done the same thing, you fall into line behind him. You make me sick. You then mention some sort of double standard being applied by the rest of us that I'm not seeing. If it had been a child that had parents not as well politically and economically connected as Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar, then they'd have gone to jail for a very long time, and be permanently labeled as a sexual predator. Joshua got a free pass, supported not only by law enforcement but the governor's office. What would that be? Oh, right. A double standard. You not only play the apologetic role to the hilt for this creature, you accuse everyone that thinks this shit is unacceptable of hypocrisy. It's not like he didn't do this thing. He admitted to it himself, without coercion. This is a known element. So I'm not excoriating either of you based on tabloid rumor. You state that the Learning Channel knew about this as late as 2006, and rather than do the right thing, they kept filming a show that is incredibly lucrative for them. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out why that might have happened. Corporations are by their nature very amoral creatures, and anything that feeds their profits is likely to keep happening until something changes that. Like, say, a product that kills the people using it in normal operation. There's a reason pharmaceutical companies keep their noses clean, and that's because people's lives are at stake. Gun manufacturers maintain strict quality control because a weapon that blows up in the hands of the person firing it will not look good on their balance sheet. A mail carrier that urinates on the letters shortly before delivery, that kind of thing. The Learning Channel packaged the Duggar family as a product, and they pulled the show when a wet predator feces impacted with a high-speed rotating impeller. Which does make at least some sense, considering. Those in the know over there should have approached the authorities at the time, or if they did, they were told that it had been handled. As a proud member of the law enforcement community, the level of corruption involved here makes me want to vomit. The Arkansas state trooper that took Joshua's statement should be hauled in front of a board of inquiry and stripped of his badge, rank, pay, benefits, pension and freedom. That is, if he wasn't already doing time on child pornography charges. It makes me wonder if Jim Bob knew about that in advance, and used it to make sure nothing came of Joshua's crimes. There is no excuse for his failure to make an arrest in this case. Had Joshua been anyone else, that trooper would have, in a heartbeat. I would have arrested the father as well, as an accessory after the fact. That Mike Fucker Flea had his pet judge expunge the police report is an abuse of his orifice, and should at very minimum see his turn in the dock, not just as an accessory to the original crimes, but for corruption as well. I've seen the court order for the expunging of these documents, and I'm appalled that they used one of the victims, who was identified only as Jane Doe, to again try and save that animal. This is what you're defending, Eric. There isn't a word that can adequately describe the feeling of disgust I get when I see you peddle this filth. An evolved great ape is as beholden to his or her social responsibilities as the most abused of you deluded goat fuckers. The difference is that the vast majority of non-Christians stick to it not because we fear retribution from a sky pixie after death, but because those actions do not support our survival as a species. At the very end, You linked a Flakebook post with your recommendation for a suitable punishment for Josh, in the form of taking his old job back at the Family Research Council, an organization of evangelical Christians that lobbies against the rights of the LGBT community under the guise of keeping families together. You edited that post later to add that you hadn't been aware that he'd already held that post, but at this point, your intentions are clear. Putting him to work in a place where he has on-demand access to yet more victims, as well as being allowed to lobby for legislation that supports not only their position, but protects him from his own crimes. Lobbying is a great way to network your way into political power, whether through elected office or by means of influence. Let's see a show of hands. Who amongst you would want to see an incestuous pedophile with the ear of influential members of Congress? Or maybe sitting amongst them? Remember that the Senate is frequently used as a stepping stone to the presidency. Who would like to see President Duggared? I thought as much. His religious convictions, although unfortunate, are not an issue here. It's that his parents used their influence to keep their child from facing the consequences of his antisocial actions. It's unacceptable on every possible level. I don't care if you're sorry. I don't care if you think you're right with your imaginary friend. In my opinion, you're actually worse than he is. Parading your stupidity and shocking lack of moral character before the public for $1. At least he had the decency to fess up when confronted with the accusations. You'd sell out your parents in an instant for a percentage. If your magic sky fairy does exist as you suggest, I wouldn't want any part of it. If a reprehensible slime like you is guaranteed a place in that heaven, I'd rather go to hell and talk to Hitchens. At least that man had enough brains in his skull to hold an intelligent conversation. You couldn't write a coherent sentence if I wrote it for you. You know what? You can keep your imaginary friend. I'll be over here in the real world waiting for your little buddy Joshua to properly implode, so the victims in this case can have some closure. Jim Bob may have kept it quiet long enough for the statute of limitations to run out, but this thing happened, and it's not going to go away quietly while I'm around. The real victims here being the women that came of the little girls he molested, as well as his children, who shouldn't have to learn the hard facts of life this way. Joshua managed to avoid prosecution through a legal technicality, but that doesn't mean he's entirely free from possible consequences. The state, having been made aware of this set of facts, is now going to have to address it. There should be an immediate investigation by Child Protection Services, or whatever passes for it down there. If they are found to have merit, and they're not being denied, then they should be around presently to remove all the children from the home, including denying Joshua and his wife the opportunity to take home the one they reportedly have coming. If I were the social worker assigned to this case, I would not give them over to Jim Bob and Melissa. They already have too many mouths to feed, and have proven that they're willing to violate the law to the detriment of their own children to save just one. In defending them, you prove yourself a sad weasel of a man that has earned what place he has in the world through a tangled web of lies and chicanery. This isn't the first time I've called you out, Eric, nor will it be the last. You and your bedroom buddies Ray Comfort, Ken Spam, and Kirk Cameron should be forced to watch while your corrupt empires burn.